We'll start with the Mangalacharan. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmiltamena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namah Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Savitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swapatantikam Vande Yam Sri Guru Sri Yudapatakalam Sri Gurun Vaishnavamsha Sri Rupam Sagaljatam Sagana Raghunathan Vitam Stam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Paljana Setam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Sri Vishakan Vitamsha हे कृष्णा करुणा सिंधु दीनबंधु जगतपते गोपेशा गोपिका कांता राधा कांता नमस्ते तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये पंचाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्यश्च च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौरभक्तवृंद हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे राम राम हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे राम हरे हरे ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय Hare Krishna. Thanks for attending today's session. So today it is more like a comparative study between Bhagavad Gita as it is and a commentary written by Mohandas K. Gandhi. First of all, I was quite attracted to this note to the readers because here, surprisingly, he has, the author, that is M.K. Gandhi, he has kind of admitted certain things about himself. So I was also quite surprised to see this. So in this note, he has actually admitted that the only thing that was consistent throughout his life was inconsistency. So it's quite impressive that he at least he admitted this thing about himself. So this book, the Message of the Gita, is available as an e-book. So there are 12 chapters in it. But in this session, we'll just review the first chapter, titled The Message of the Gita. So it consists of the compilation of commentaries written by Gandhi regarding the Bhagavad Gita. So we look at to what extent his commentary matches the purport written by our acharyas, especially Srila Prabhupada. So here he has he's talking about his first acquaintance with the Gita. So he starts by saying that even in 1888 to 89, when I first became acquainted with the Gita, I felt that it was not a historical work, but that under the guise of physical warfare, it described the duel that perpetually went on in the hearts of mankind. So this is precisely the reason why I titled this session as Bhagavad Gita versus Gandhi Gita. We have even seen from the purport of Srila Prabhupada, where he has mentioned that many other commentators, they have always, their aim has always been to only present their own opinion and not to explain regarding what was said by Krishna. So that's why I titled this session as Bhagavad Gita versus Gandhi Gita, because Gandhi's commentary about the Gita is just fully based on his own mental concoctions and not one of the bona fide commentary. And we shall see as we go on regarding how just how much his commentary contradicts the commentary of our acharyas. So he goes on to say that the physical warfare was brought in merely to make the description of the internal duel more alluring. This preliminary intuition became more confirmed. So he is, first of all, he is saying that uh, neither the Mahabharata or the Gita was historical, and he is reaffirming his stand. I do not regard the Mahabharata as a historical work in the accepted sense. The persons that described may be historical. So now we look at what our acharyas have said in this chapter from Bhagavad Gita as it is, under the section titled Setting the Scene. This is what Prabhupada says. Bhagavad Gita originally appears in an episode in the Mahabharata, the epic Sanskrit history of the ancient world. So from the very beginning itself, we can see just how much contradiction is there between the commentary written by the manufactured Mahatma and the bona fide commentary of our acharyas. Lord Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita to his friend and devotee, Arjuna. Their discourse took place just before the onset of war. So everything that is written by Srila Prabhupada, it clearly contradicts the mental concoctions of the manufactured Mahatma. Then Gandhi goes on to say, the author of the Mahabharata has not established the necessity of physical warfare. He has proved its futility. He has made the victors shed tears of sorrow and repentance and has left them nothing but a legacy of miseries. Okay, this is another nonsensical perception regarding the war of Mahabharata. And many so-called rationalists and self-proclaimed intellectuals, they also always try to project Krishna as a warmonger. So most of such people, they don't have complete knowledge of the Gita. Mostly they might not have crossed chapter 1. Of course, from chapter 1, we can see regarding Arjuna Vishada Yoga, where he himself was reluctant to fight. But for those who have completely studied the Gita, they will really understand about why the war was necessary and what was gained from the war. Like in 1.32, 33, Arjuna is, as we know in chapter 1, Arjuna is actually complaining to Krishna, and he's unwilling to fight. O Govinda, of what avail to us our kingdom, happiness, or even life itself, when all those for whom we may desire them are now arrayed on this battlefield? O Madhusudana, when teachers, fathers, sons, grandfathers, maternal uncles, fathers-in-law, grandsons, brothers-in-law, and other relatives are ready to give up their lives and properties and are standing before me, why should I wish to kill them, even though they might otherwise kill me? O maintainer of all living entities, I am not prepared to fight with them, even in exchange for the three worlds, let alone this earth. What pleasure will we derive from killing the sons of Dhritarashtra? So, of course, we know that Arjuna was clearly confused in the beginning from chapter 1. But in chapter 18, all his doubts were cleared. But those who try to those who always try to project Krishna as a warmonger, they only pick and choose so that it suits their agenda. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada writes, Arjuna's deep affection for community and family members is exhibited here partly due to his natural compassion for them. He is therefore not prepared to fight. Arjuna fears that all his relatives and friends will be killed on the battlefield and he will be unable to share his opulence after victory. This is a typical calculation of material life. The transcendental life is different. Since a devotee wants to satisfy the desires of the Lord, he can accept all kinds of opulence for the service of the Lord. So our manufactured Mahatma was highlighting regarding this legacy of miseries. But this clearly shows the shallowness of his understanding. It clearly shows that he failed to understand the true purport of the Gita, because Arjuna himself was too attached with the material designations, especially as we can see from this verse. He's talking about his teachers, fathers, sons, grandfathers. As we know, all these are material designations and they are all temporary. And only a person who does not know regarding the true identity of the living entity, meaning that only someone who has no self-realization about the spirit soul, only that person would be completely obsessed with all these material designations. So even in the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains that the main reason for Arjuna's distress was due to his attachment with all these material designations. So for those who have completed their studies of the Gita with commentaries from bona fide acharyas, they can clearly understand about why Arjuna was also so distressed. And for those who clearly understand about self-realization, those people won't be writing this kind of nonsense that the victors were left with a legacy of miseries, because these so-called miseries were only due to the attachment with material designations. Arjuna himself was clearly ignorant of self-realization, but he became enlightened in towards the end of chapter 18. At this point, he did not know that Krishna had already killed them before they are coming into the battlefield, and that he was only to become an instrument for Krishna. The Lord was determined to kill the miscreants, although Arjuna wanted to excuse them. So in chapter 1, Arjuna was completely ignorant and he became so confused, and only in 2.7, he surrendered to the Supreme Lord as a disciple. So Arjuna said, now I am confused about my duty and I've lost all composure because of miserly weakness. In this condition, I am asking you to tell me for certain what is best for me. Now I am your disciple and a soul surrendered unto you. Please instruct me. So Arjuna clearly surrendered as a disciple to receive knowledge from Krishna. He did not go on with his own mental concoctions. Unfortunately, many so-called commentators of the Gita, they have always made it a point to pursue their own agenda with their own mental concoctions. That is what even Srila Prabhupada highlights in the preface and intro sections of Bhagavad Gita as it is. And even there are, in many other schools of thought, there's always this debate going on regarding whether is it really necessary for someone to accept a spiritual master. So many of the so-called commentators of the Gita, including our manufactured Mahatma, even he did not get his knowledge about the Gita from a bona fide spiritual master. So as we shall see later also, his commentary regarding the Gita is completely disastrous. So that is one reason, that itself is reason enough to understand the importance of getting the knowledge from a bona fide spiritual master. In many other schools of thought, they often say that no, it's okay even if you don't have a spiritual master, everything is within you. You can learn everything on your own. But that would only lead to further ignorance. So Krishna himself emphasizes the importance of approaching a spiritual master in 4.34. Tad vidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnanina sattva darshanaha. Just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master, inquire from him submissively, and render service unto him. The self-realized souls can impart knowledge unto you because they have seen the truth. So for the so-called Mahatmas or manufactured Mahatmas, when they think that they know everything, and when they produce their own mental concoction in the name of commentary, so we'll be having this type of disastrous commentary which clearly contradict the teachings of our bona fide acharyas. Krishna also says in 4.35, having obtained real knowledge from a self-realized soul, you will never fall again into such illusion, for by this knowledge you will see that all living beings are but part of the Supreme, or in other words, that they are mine. In 4.35, in the purport, Prabhupada further explains regarding why Arjuna was facing that so-called misery in chapter 1. By Maya alone, Arjuna thought that the temporary bodily relationship with his kinsman was more important than his eternal spiritual relationship with Krishna. So only this was the sole cause for his bewilderment. He was thinking that his own material designations are more important than his eternal relationship with the Supreme Lord. So that is what actually causes the so-called distress or misery, as our manufactured Mahatma says. The whole teaching of the Gita is targeted toward this end. That is to make everyone understand that our eternal relationship with the Supreme Lord should come first, and not all the other material designations like father, grandfather, or teacher. A living being as Krishna's eternal servitor cannot be separated from Krishna, and his sense of being an identity apart from Krishna is called Maya. So the entire Gita is meant to dispel this Maya, which leads the conditioned souls to be entangled with so many material designations. But unfortunately, our manufactured Mahatma, who has written the commentary of the Gita, he is still stuck in Arjuna Vishada Yoga, and he has failed to emphasize the true purport as mentioned by Srila Prabhupada here. For the person who is completely enlightened that his eternal relationship with Krishna is the most important one compared to all other material designations, that person will not be stuck in the situation of Arjuna as observed from chapter 1 of the Gita. When one is engaged in transcendental service through Krishna consciousness, one becomes at once liberated from this illusion. One can acquire such pure knowledge only from the bona fide spiritual master. So if someone thinks that he knows everything and he continues to express his own mental concoctions without looking at the bona fide Acharya's commentary, then we tend to have other versions of the Gita like this Gandhi Gita. Also, apparently our manufactured Mahatma was also referring to the distress faced by the Pandavas generally after the war, especially even from the Bhagavatam, we know that Yudhishthira was so distressed to see so many people die just for him to get enthroned as the king of Hastinapur. As mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam 1.8.46, King Yudhishthira, who was much aggrieved, could not be convinced despite instructions by great sages headed by Vyasa and the Lord Krishna himself, the performer of superhuman feats, and despite all historical evidence. So even this misery faced by Yudhishthira happened for a reason, as explained by Srila Prabhupada in the purport. The pious king Yudhishthira was mortified because of the mass massacre of human beings in the battle of Kurukshetra, especially on his count. It is said in the Mahabharata Adi Parva 225 that 640 million men were killed in the 18 days of the battle of Kurukshetra. But Maharaj Yudhishthira would not be satisfied even though he was instructed by the greatest personalities of the time. So does this mean that even Lord Krishna failed to pacify him? As super soul of King Yudhishthira, he did not allow the king to be convinced by the words of Vyasa and others, including himself, because he desired that the king hear instructions from the dying Bhishma Deva, who was another great devotee of the Lord. So today we are able to study the 700 verses of the Gita mainly because Arjuna had that he faced that so-called misery in chapter 1, Arjuna Vishada Yoga. That's how even we are able to relish the teachings of the Gita. Similarly, Yudhishthira was also put into that similar position so that he would be able to receive the transcendental teachings from Bhishma Dev, and it was all the arrangement of the Supreme Lord. So those who are clearly enlightened by the transcendental actions of the Supreme Lord, they won't be saying that even the victors of the Mahabharata had to face so many miseries, so they won't be giving such half-baked commentary. Prabhupada even explains that the Lord also desired that King Yudhishthira be pacified by the words of Bhishma Deva so that the world could see that Bhishma Deva excelled all in knowledge, including the Lord himself. So we have clearly seen why Arjuna and Yudhishthira had to face that so-called misery. It was all due to the arrangement of the Supreme Lord. And that's why even today we are able to relish those transcendental teachings. Also in Bhagavad Gita, as it is in under the section setting the scene, Prabhupada also explains that Lord Krishna was not an ordinary man, but the Supreme Godhead himself. He is the eternal upholder of religion. So Krishna favored the righteous sons of Pandu and protected them. Now, not just our manufactured Mahatma, but even many self-proclaimed intellectuals, they also say that Krishna was like a warmonger because he caused the war to happen, but it was unavoidable, as explained by Prabhupada in this section. Duryodhana challenged the Pandavas to a gambling match, but the gambling, which was rigged, cheated the Pandavas of their kingdom and forced them into 13 years of exile. Upon returning from exile, the Pandavas rightfully requested their kingdom from Duryodhana, who bluntly refused to yield it. Duty bound as princes to serve in public administration, the 5 Pandavas reduced their request to a mere 5 villages. But Duryodhana arrogantly replied that he wouldn't spare them enough land into which to drive a pin. So many efforts were made to avoid the war, but Duryodhana was so adamant, and today those who are trying to portray Krishna as a warmonger, so they also happen to be the fan club members of Duryodhana. They will never look at these details about how Duryodhana himself was unwilling to accept any compromise. So even after his refusal, its war seemed inevitable. Krishna himself took the role of messenger for the sons of Pandu and went to the court of Dhritarashtra to plead for peace. When his pleas were refused, war was now certain. So many efforts were made to completely avoid the war. But many self-proclaimed intellectuals won't look at all these details because they have their own agenda to pursue. As in the paddy field, the unnecessary plants are taken out. In the religious field of Kurukshetra, where the father of religion, Sri Krishna, was present, the unwanted plants like Dhritarashtra's son, Duryodhana, and others would be wiped out, and the thoroughly religious persons headed by Yudhishthira would be established by the Lord. So the Pandavas even reduced their request to a mere 5 villages, but when Duryodhana was not willing to accept even that request, so the war could not be avoided, and the Supreme Lord wanted to establish Dharma by wiping out the evil-minded sons of Dhritarashtra. In the purport of 1.36, Prabhupada also explains that there are 6 kinds of aggressors. poison giver, one who sets fire to the house, one who attacks with deadly weapons, one who plunders riches, one who occupies another's land, and one who kidnaps a wife. Such aggressors are at once to be killed, and no sin is incurred by killing such aggressors. So, for those who are familiar with the history of Mahabharata, especially the characterization of the uh, Kauravas, so we know that they have done all these type of aggression against the Pandavas. So the war was completely inevitable because from childhood itself, the Kauravas, especially Duryodhana, he was always envious of the Pandavas, and he crossed all limits, especially even after cheating them in the gambling match, and also by refusing for any compromise. Apart from that, Lord Krishna also clearly mentions in 4.7 and 4.8, यदा यदा हि धर्मस्य ग्लानिर्भवति भारत अभ्युत्थानम् अधर्मस्य तदात्मानं सृजाम्यहम्. Whenever and wherever there is a decline in religious practice, O descendant of Bharata, and a predominant rise of irreligion, at that time I descend myself. 4.8 Paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya cha dushkritam dharma samsthapanarthaya sambhavami yuge yuge. To deliver the pious, to annihilate the miscreants, as well as to re-establish the principles of religion, I myself appear millennium after millennium. So there are so many reasons clearly explained by the Supreme Lord Krishna about why the war had to happen. But our manufactured Mahatma says that the war was futile and it resulted in only in misery. So someone who is truly enlightened by the teachings of the Gita would not be writing such nonsense. And in 5.29, Krishna clearly says, Suhridam Sarva Bhutanam. He is the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities. So that's why our eternal relationship with the Supreme Lord should be regarded as the foremost of everything else, and not the material denominations. Arjuna had his own delusions, mainly because he was unable to realize that he is also a spirit soul and who is part and parcel of the Supreme Lord himself. So as long as we fail to realize our eternal relationship with the Supreme Lord, and if we are too obsessed with all other material denominations, then we will also be as ignorant as the manufactured Mahatma, who is saying that the war proved to be completely futile and it only resulted in misery. Lord Krishna also, he has also given many further explanations regarding why the war was necessary. Like in 11.32, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, Time I am the great destroyer of the world, and I have come here to destroy all people, with the exception of you, the Pandavas. All the soldiers here on both sides will be slain. Therefore, get up, prepare to fight and wield glory, conquer your enemies, and enjoy a flourishing kingdom. They are already put to death by my arrangement, and you, O Savyasachi, can be but an instrument in the fight. So it was not like, we can clearly see that the war was not futile. It was all the arrangement of the Supreme Lord. Next point by our manufactured Mahatma, instead of teaching the rules of physical warfare, tells us how a perfected man is to be known. In the characteristics of the perfected man of the Gita, I do not see any to correspond to physical warfare. Again, our manufactured Mahatma is, his understanding is clearly flawed here, because he is too obsessed with painting the warfare as a futile exercise, but he completely ignores the many other important aspects, especially those related to bhakti. So this is due to a perfectly flawed observation, that too from the perspective of a typical karmi, which is completely devoid of any vision from the perspective of bhakti. So regarding this point, our manufactured Mahatma often refers to the symptoms of Sthita Prajna in 2.54. In 2.54, Arjuna said, "O Krishna, what are the symptoms of one whose consciousness is thus merged in transcendence? How does he speak? What is his language? How does he sit? And how does he walk?" To which the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "O Partha, when a man gives up all varieties of desire for sense gratification, which arise from mental concoction, and when his mind, thus purified, finds satisfaction in the self alone, then he is said to be in pure transcendental consciousness. One who is not disturbed in mind, even amidst the threefold miseries, or elated when there is happiness, and who is free from attachment, fear, and anger, is called a sage of steady mind." So, our manufactured Mahatma always points to this Sthita Prajna symptoms to say that someone who is truly enlightened, he should possess all these attributes. But from the complete teachings of the Gita, we know that the person who develops these Sthita Prajna symptoms, uh, for such a person, it is only the first step. Whatever symptoms that are developed as this Sthita Prajna stage, it should be channeled towards devotional service. So that is more important, not merely to develop these symptoms and sit and do nothing. So Krishna himself explains in 5.6 also, merely renouncing all activities, yet not engaging in the devotional service of the Lord cannot make one happy. So even for someone who has developed the symptoms of Sthita Prajna, so that person should ideally channel all his energy towards devotional service. A thoughtful person engaged in devotional service can achieve the supreme without delay. One who works in devotion, who is a pure soul and who controls his mind and senses, is dear to everyone, and everyone is dear to him. Though always working, such a mind is never entangled. A person in the divine consciousness, although engaged in seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, moving about, sleeping, and breathing, always knows within himself that he actually does nothing at all, because while speaking, evacuating, receiving, or opening or closing his eyes, he always knows that only the material senses are engaged with the objects and that he is aloof from them. One who performs his duty without attachment, surrendering the results unto the Supreme Lord, is unaffected by sinful action, as the lotus leaf is untouched by water. So our manufactured Mahatma always points to the symptoms of Sthita Prajna, and he often tries to emphasize that only someone who has developed the symptoms of Sthita Prajna is completely a sage. But based on the teachings of Lord Krishna, especially from this chapter 5, we know that merely being someone who is similar to that Sthita Prajna symptoms, that alone is not enough. That person should still focus all his energy in devotional service. So after hearing all the instructions of Lord Krishna, Arjuna was clearly convinced, and he said that all he's free from all doubts, and he was prepared to act according to Krishna's instructions. So regardless of whether there was a war or there was no war, what truly matters is that a person who is truly in Krishna consciousness should always be prepared to act according to the Supreme Lord's instructions. Even when the Supreme Lord once wanted Arjuna to kill, he was prepared to kill. So it was not like Arjuna merely wanted to enjoy the kingdom. He clearly says, "Karishye Vachanam Tava." So that should be the ultimate symptom of Sthita Prajna, always prepared to act according to the instructions of the Supreme Lord. But our manufactured Mahatma is always obsessed with his own mental concoctions. So even until now, we have seen just how disastrous his commentary is. Now, a few more interesting observations by our manufactured Mahatma. He also says that Krishna of the Gita is perfection and right knowledge personified, but the picture is imaginary. That does not mean that Krishna, the adored of his people, never lived, but perfection is imagined. The idea of a perfect incarnation is an aftergrowth. So, apparently, our manufactured Mahatma is trying to say that the perfection of Swayam Bhagavan Krishna, who descended to this material world, his perfection was actually imaginary. Krishna is also known as Purna Purushottam. So our manufactured Mahatma is actually saying that the perfection of Swayam Bhagavan Purna Purushottam Krishna was imagined. Of course, even from the earlier parts of the commentary, we saw that he did not even believe that the Mahabharata was historical. So in 4.9, Krishna clearly says, Janma karma chame divyam evyo veti tatvata tatvadeyam punarjanma naitimameti soarjuna. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. So a person who is truly enlightened in Krishna consciousness is someone who truly knows the transcendental nature of Krishna's appearance and activities. So our manufactured Mahatma clearly fails to fulfill this criteria. Then our manufactured Mahatma continues to explain regarding his own mental concoction regarding the concept of incarnation. From our Bhagavatam sessions also, we have seen that Srila Prabhupada specifically titled the third chapter of the first canto of Bhagavatam as Krishna, the source of all incarnations. So in most of the other parts of the purport, Srila Prabhupada always uses the word expansion, but in very specific parts of his purport, he uses the word incarnation. So we have actually seen the difference between the two from many of our previous sessions. So from the perspective of our acharyas, from their bona fide commentaries, we can clearly understand the true meaning of incarnation and expansion. Of course, we have to always follow the bona fide commentary of our acharyas to know the truth. But since our manufactured Mahatma was thinking that he is the only one who knew everything, so he had something else to say. He says, in Hinduism, incarnation is ascribed to one who has performed some extraordinary service of mankind. There is an Urdu saying which means Adam is not God, but he is a spark of the divine. It is in accordance with this train of thought that Krishna enjoys in Hinduism the status of the most perfect incarnation. So, in other words, our manufactured Mahatma is actually reducing Supreme Lord Krishna, Swayam Bhagavan, to the level of Adam as an incarnation. But from the purports of our acharyas, we know that Swayam Bhagavan Krishna was the one who descended to the material world. Even from Bhagavatam 1.3.28, Vyasadeva himself says that iti cham sakala pumsa Krishna's to Bhagavan Swayam. But that is what our acharyas say. But since our manufactured Mahatma was always thinking that only he knew everything, so he ended up reducing the Supreme Lord Krishna to the level of Adam. In 7.19, Krishna says, Bhaunam Janmanamante, Jnanavan Mam Prapadyate, Vasudeva Sarvamiti, Samahatma Sudurlabhaha. After many births and deaths, he who is actually in knowledge surrenders unto me. Knowing me to be the cause of all causes and all that is, such a great soul is very rare. So in this verse, Krishna clearly explains the meaning of a true Mahatma. So clearly even from the teachings of Krishna himself, we can clearly understand that someone who reduces the Supreme Lord Krishna to the level of Adam, such a person cannot be a Mahatma. He was only a manufactured Mahatma, manufactured purely for political reasons. Also in 9.11, Krishna says, Avajanati Mamura, Manushim Tanuashritam, Paramam Ajananto, Mahubhuta Maheshwaram. Fools deride me when I design in the human form. They do not know my transcendental nature as the Supreme Lord of all that be. So, in this verse, Krishna is clearly explaining about the mudas. So, for certain person who reduces the Supreme Lord Krishna to the level of Adam, so such a person clearly fits into this description of a muda. In many parts of the Gita, the Supreme Lord Krishna clearly explains about how he is the Supreme Lord as Swayam Bhagavan himself. Like in 10.8, Krishna says, Aham sarvasya prabho matta sarvam pravartati iti matva bhajantema buddhabhava samanita. I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from me. The wise who perfectly know this engage in my devotional service and worship me with all their hearts. So the wise are the ones who understand that Krishna Swayam Bhagavan was the one who spoke the Gita. Otherwise, those who come up with their own mental concoctions, they clearly fit into the criteria of mudas described by Krishna in 9.11. Not just Krishna, even Arjuna describes about Krishna in 10.12 and 10.13. Param Brahma, Param Dhamma, Pavitram Param Bhavan, Purusham Shashvatam Divyam, Adidevam Vajam Vibhum. You are the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the ultimate abode, the purest, the absolute truth. You are the eternal, transcendental, original person, the unborn, the greatest. All the great sages, such as Narada, Ashita, Devala, Vyasa, confirm this truth about you, and now you yourself are declaring it to me. So it is truly surprising how a so-called Mahatma could have been so ignorant about these details. But Arjuna also continues to add Sarvameta Ritamanye, Yanma Madasi Keshava, Na ite Bhagavan Vyaktim, Vidur Devana Danava. O Krishna, I totally accept as truth all that you have told me. Neither the demigods nor the demons or Lord can understand your personality. So if even the demigods are not able to understand the personality of the Supreme Lord Krishna, so it is not surprising that a manufactured Mahatma failed to understand the truth. Next, our manufactured Mahatma continues to say that man is not at peace with himself till he has become like unto God, and this is self-realization. So he continues to express his own mental concoction regarding the concept of self-realization. This self-realization is the subject of the Gita, as it is of all scriptures, but its author surely did not write it to establish that doctrine. So our manufactured Mahatma, first of all, did not believe that Mahabharata was historical. So even the picture of Krishna is imaginary. And now he is attributing everything that has been spoken by the Supreme Lord Krishna. He is attributing everything to the author of the Gita. From Gita 2.2, it is the first verse which was spoken by the Supreme Lord Krishna. So it begins with Sri Bhagavan Vacha. So from the Gita and also from the purports and commentaries of our bona fide acharyas, we know that the transcendental teachings of the Gita were clearly spoken by the Supreme Lord. But our manufactured Mahatma had only expressed his own mental concoctions. Even towards the end of the Gita, in 18.75, Sanjaya says, by the mercy of Vyasa, I've heard these most confidential talks directly from the master of all mysticism, Krishna, who was speaking personally to Arjuna. Wherever there is Krishna, the master of all mystics, and wherever there is Arjuna, the supreme archer, there will also certainly be opulence, victory, extraordinary power, and morality. That's my opinion. So, even in these verses, apart from Arjuna, even Sanjaya reaffirms that the verses of the Gita were spoken by Swayam Bhagavan himself, and Sanjaya was able to see the vision about of the dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna by the mercy of his spiritual master Vyasdev. So all these details are there in the Gita, but since our manufactured Mahatma felt that only he was the only knowledgeable person, so he simply wrote all his mental concoctions in the name of commentary. Of course, it has not been confirmed whether our Mahatma actually studied the Bhagavatam or not. If he had no knowledge of Bhagavatam, then we should also thank Krishna for it, because at least the Bhagavatam was spared. Otherwise, he would have written more garbage in the name of his Bhagavatam commentary. So further points from our so-called Mahatma's commentary. So he's talking about the renunciation of the fruits of action. The Gita is divided into 3 main parts, 6 chapters in each part. The first 6 chapters belong to the Karma Yoga portion. The middle 6 chapters belong to the Bhakti Yoga portion, and the last 6 chapters belong to the Jnana Yoga portion. But many of the commentators, they have always been so obsessed with the Karma Yoga portion, mainly the first 6 chapters. They have always ignored the Bhakti Yoga and Jnana Yoga portions. Especially the Bhakti Yoga portion is always treated as secondary to the Karma Yoga portion. So here, our manufactured Mahatma also says that renunciation is the central sun round which devotion, knowledge, and the rest revolve like planets. So he is actually thinking that the Karma Yoga portion is the most important portion, and Bhakti is like secondary. So again, this is also completely in contradiction to the commentary of our acharyas. Again, even in this paragraph, our manufactured Mahatma is attributing everything to the author of the Gita. In this paragraph, our so-called Mahatma is talking about the symptoms of the yogi. Actually, these symptoms were explained by Krishna in the Dhyana Yoga chapter, from chapter 6, especially from this verse 6.7. For one who has conquered the mind, the super soul is already reached, for he has attained tranquility. To such a man, happiness, distress, heat, cold, honor, dishonor are all the same. So again, similar to the stage of Sthita Prajna, even these symptoms are also, ideally, they are there in the self of a transcendentalist. But what truly matters most is how such a person uses his energy to serve the Supreme Lord. So merely developing these qualities is not enough. It has to translate into action in the form of devotional service. But many commentators, like our so-called Mahatma, they have always made bhakti as subservient to the Karma Yoga part. So such people, they have always completely ignored the most important part of the Gita, especially the parts related to bhakti, as mentioned by Krishna in 9.34 and 18.65. In 9.34, Krishna says, Manmana bhavad makto madhyajimam namaskuru mame vaisasi yuktavam atmanam mat parayana. Engage your mind always in thinking of me, become my devotee, offer obeisances to me and worship me, being completely absorbed in me, surely you will come to me. 18.65 Manmana Bhavamto Madhyajimav Namaskuru Mame Vaishati Satyam Te Pratijani Priyosime. Always think of me, become my devotee, worship me and offer your homage unto me. Thus you will come to me without fail. I promise you this because you are my dear friend. So it is not sufficient if someone uh, merely develops the qualities of being in equanimity, being unaffected by heat, cold, success, failure. So that merely is not sufficient. Such a person should always focus on how he could serve the Supreme Lord, as the Supreme Lord himself has instructed us about how we can become his devotees. Unfortunately, many of the commentators who were obsessed with merely expressing their own mental concoctions, they have always ignored these important aspects, especially those related to bhakti. They have always been so obsessed with the karma yoga portion, and they have actually made bhakti yoga as subservient to karma yoga. Our so-called Mahatma also says to be a real devotee is to realize oneself. Knowledge and devotion, to be true, have to stand the test of renunciation of fruits of action. So again, there's always this obsession to make bhakti as secondary. Um, from this paragraph, the so-called Mahatma says that to be a real devotee is to realize oneself. Okay. However, that is just the first step towards becoming a devotee. Self-realization is just the first step, but devotional service should follow. Even from the introduction to Bhagavad Gita as it is, Prabhupada explains that we are not these bodies, and realizing this is the first stage in spiritual realization. So self-realization, which focuses on distinguishing between the spirit soul and the material body, is only the first step. What truly matters is what we do after getting that preliminary knowledge. However, many other self-appointed commentators who did not belong to any bona fide parampara, they have always ended up making bhakti yoga as just an add-on to the karma yoga part. So also in these paragraphs, our so-called Mahatma has completely reduced the bhakti yoga portion to a secondary or subservient part of karma yoga. Then in this paragraph, our so-called Mahatma says that the unmistakable teaching of the Gita is that one should do the allotted work but renounce its fruit. Of course, even in WhatsApp University, we can always see that a lot of people will be sharing this verse, and people will always be attributing that this is the most important part of the Gita. Again, this is also part of the Karma Yoga portion of the Gita. It appears in chapter 2, but the truly enlightened devotees will further understand that these are only the preliminary symptoms, but what matters most is our devotional service to the Supreme Lord. So that has been explained in the intro part to Bhagavad Gita as it is. The problem is that normally in WhatsApp University, people will be sharing this verse 2.47 as the most important teaching of the Gita. But in the introduction section to Bhagavad Gita as it is, Srila Prabhupada explains that there are these 5 principal subject matters which are being discussed in the Gita: Ishvara, Jiva, Prakriti, Kala, Karma. Out of these 5, the Supreme Godhead is the greatest of all. So that should be the topmost understanding for one who has truly understood the Gita. The living beings are in quality like the Supreme Controller. However, we are his eternal servants. Material nature is not independent. We should know that behind this cosmic manifestation, there is a controller. Nothing could be manifested without being controlled. It is childish to not to consider the controller. So we have also seen that our so-called Mahatma, he even reduced the status of the ultimate controller to the level of Adam. So our so-called Mahatma also says that renunciation of the renunciation of the Gita is the acid test of faith. He who broods over results is like a man given to objects of senses. He is ever distracted, says goodbye to all scruples. Everything is right in his estimation, and he therefore resorts to means fair and foul to attain his end. Ironically, our so-called Mahatma is describing about himself when he says that uh, the person who fails to renounce, he always thinks that everything is right in his estimation. So ironically, he has again made an admission about his own personality. So next we'll be looking at a few excerpts from this book, Patel, A Life by Rajmohan Gandhi. This is regarding an episode which happened before independence, when the Congress party was uh, trying to elect the potential prime minister. So these few pages were taken from the book uh, Patel, A Life. So it has been described in this book about how the first prime minister was selected and not elected. And our so-called Mahatma, he hijacked the entire democratic process. It was during this interval that Nehru took over from Azad and therefore became, when the interim government was installed, prime minister in effect. So the first prime minister was actually the Congress president who was supposed to be elected, but our so-called Mahatma, who always thought that he was the one who knew everything and that everything which he did was right. So he had that type of tendency. So he ended up hijacking the entire democratic process of electing the first prime minister of independent India. So only it was only our so-called Mahatma who wanted Nehru to be appointed as the first PM. It was only him because none of the other committee members, they actually nominated him. One of Gandhi's many reasons for favoring Nehru was publicly mentioned by him a year later. Jawaharlal cannot be replaced today. He, a Harrow boy, a Cambridge graduate, and a barrister, is wanted to carry on the negotiations with Englishmen. Another was Nehru's rapport with at least a section of the Muslims, contrasted with Vallabhai's disinclination to establish it. That Jawahar will not take second place is better known abroad than Sardar and will make India play a role in the international affairs. So it was Sardar Vallabhai Patel was the favorite choice of all the committee members of the Congress party. However, our so-called Mahatma, who thought that he was the only one who knew everything, he hijacked the entire process by uh, personally preferring Nehru, who did not even receive one nomination from the committee members. As soon as Nehru had been formally proposed, Kripalani withdrew his own nomination and handed Patel a fresh piece of paper with the letters withdrawal written on it. Vallabhbhai was pulling out, Kripalani's draft said, so that Nehru could be elected unopposed. So our so-called Mahatma actually forced Vallabhbhai Patel and Kripalani to withdraw their nominations. So ironically, our so-called Mahatma said that the person who is not truly renounced, he would always end up thinking that he is the only one who knows everything. So he will use even foul means to achieve his objective. And ironically, that's exactly what he did. He hijacked the entire democratic process. He did not allow the members to vote for their preferred potential prime ministerial candidate. So he hijacked the entire process. And that was also another blunder which resulted in independent India getting the worst ever prime minister. So unfortunately, our so-called Mahatma always had this disease, thinking that only he knew everything. So similarly, that also we can see how that has been reflected even in his commentary. So he continues to repeat about this author of the Gita in many places. So again and again, we can clearly see how his so-called commentary is clearly in contradiction with the bona fide purports by our acharyas. Then our so-called Mahatma also says, I felt that in trying to enforce in one's life the central teaching of the Gita, one is bound to follow truth and ahimsa. But if the Gita believed in ahimsa or it was included in desirelessness, why did the author take a warlike illustration? So again, our so-called Mahatma is attributing everything to the author of the Gita. And then he's also trying to paint this picture about how it was like an illustration, an imaginary illustration. Now, even the definition of ahimsa by our so-called Mahatma is also very interesting. So this is from the website mkgandhi.org. A few quotes about his version of ahimsa. I did not believe that we had been quite reduced to slavery. So our so-called Mahatma had this to say about what the British were doing in India. So many real freedom fighters, unlike him, so many real freedom fighters had died even before his birth. But our so-called Mahatma is saying that we had not been reduced to slavery. I felt then that it was more the fault of the individual officials than of the British system, and that we could convert them by love. If we would improve our status through the help and cooperation of the British, it was our duty to win their help by standing by them in their hour of need. So from the Mahatma's quote, it clearly reeks of him being a collaborator of the British, and these are clearly not the words of a freedom fighter, as many would like us to believe. So whether it was in World War I or even in World War II, our so-called Mahatma always wanted Indians to win over the love of the British, the aggressors. So he always wanted the Indians to even fight for the British in the two world wars so that we could win independence. So he was clearly more of a collaborator of the British and not a freedom fighter. And his version of ahimsa is such that we are not supposed to, the Indians were not, prior to independence, the Indians were not supposed to fight against the British because that would have been violence. But it was okay for Indians to fight in the two world wars and die for the British because that would not be violence, according to him. So even his own version of Ahimsa was extremely interesting. In assessing the implications of renunciation of truth, we are not required to probe the mind of the author of the Gita. Again, our so-called Mahatma clearly believed that Mahabharata and the Gita were work of fiction. So he's attributing everything to the author of the Gita. And he's also trying to label the author of the Gita as a poet who came up with his imaginary work. So he also tries to further distort the meaning of the Gita by saying that it was just a poem, so it will give limitless meaning. Like man, the meaning of great writing suffers evolution. On examining the history of languages, we notice that the meaning of important words has changed or expanded. This is true of the Gita. Again, our so-called Mahatma is reducing the Gita to the work of a poet which had suffered evolution. So he's actually trying to dilute the meaning of the Gita as though it is similar to other other poems. But our acharyas have clearly a contradictory view compared to the mental concoctions of our so-called Mahatma. In setting the scene of in Bhagavad Gita as it is, Prabhupada says the general pattern translators have followed in rendering Bhagavad Gita into English has been to brush aside the person Krishna to make room for their own concepts and philosophies. The history of Mahabharata is taken as quaint mythology, and Krishna becomes a poetic device for presenting the ideas of some anonymous genius, or at best, he becomes a minor historical personage. But the person Krishna is both the goal and substance of Bhagavad Gita. So this is what our acharyas say about the Supreme Lord Krishna and the Bhagavad Gita, clearly in contradiction with the mental concoctions of the so-called Mahatma. Since Krishna is the speaker of the Gita and its ultimate goal as well, the Bhagavad Gita as it is presents this great scripture in its true terms. So the Bhagavad Gita as it is also was written by Srila Prabhupada to completely counter all the rubbish commentary written by the so-called Mahatmas. Again, our so-called Mahatma also continues to say that he's still obsessed with the Karma Yoga portions, and therefore his commentary also ends up being more nonsensical. But for those who clearly understand the Gita, we will understand that during every stage, the Supreme Lord Krishna is clearly trying to establish bhakti as the topmost yoga, and he wanted Arjuna to fight as a way of expressing bhakti. So, according to our bona fide Acharya's commentary, bhakti is the topmost part of the Gita, and karma is just the means to an end. So even in many verses, the Supreme Lord Krishna is clearly telling Arjuna to do his duty, that is to fight. So in 2.3, Krishna says, do not yield to this degrading importance. It does not become you. Give up such petty weakness of the heart and arise. 2.18, again, Krishna is saying, therefore fight, O descendant of Bharata. 2.31, considering your specific duty as a Kshatriya, you should know that there is no better engagement for you than fighting on religious principles. and so there is no need for hesitation. 2.33. If you do not perform your religious duty of fighting, then you will certainly incur sins for neglecting your duties and thus lose your reputation as a fighter. O son of Kunti, either you will be killed on the battlefield and attain the heavenly planets, or you will conquer and enjoy the earthly kingdom. Therefore, get up with determination and fight. Do thou fight for the sake of fighting without considering happiness or distress, loss or gain, victory or defeat, and by so doing you shall never incur sin. Therefore, O Arjuna, surrendering all your works unto me with full knowledge of me, without desires for profit, with no claims to proprietorship, and free from Ataji, fight. 8.7. Therefore, Arjuna, you should always think of me in the form of Krishna and at the same time carry out your prescribed duty of fighting. With your activities dedicated to me and your mind and intelligence fixed on me, you will attain me without doubt. So, the Supreme Lord Krishna has been repeating his instruction to Arjuna. He's telling Arjuna to fight, but that should be done as an expression of devotion towards the Supreme Lord. So, by doing so, even for us, as long as we remember the Supreme Lord in devotion and still carry out our prescribed duties, we will attain the Supreme Lord. So, bhakti should always be the topmost objective. However, the so-called commentators, they have always been so obsessed only with the Karma Yoga portion, and they have always made bhakti as subservient to it. Also in 11.33, Lord Krishna says, therefore get up and fight, and you are merely an instrument. Now, this is actually the most interesting part of the commentary by the so-called Mahatma. He's saying that the seeker is at liberty to extract from this treasure any meaning he likes, so as to enable him to enforce in his life the central teaching. So, of course, the teachings of the Gita are truly universal. They are non-sectarian, as mentioned by Srila Prabhupada himself. However, it is quite nonsensical to say that the readers can simply extract the meanings as they wish. So, this is another disastrous consequence of not learning the Gita from a bona fide spiritual master. In the introduction chapter to Bhagavad Gita as it is, Srila Prabhupada says, if we want to take a particular medicine, then we have to follow the directions written on the label. We cannot take the medicine according to our own whim or the direction of a friend. Similarly, Bhagavad Gita should be taken or accepted as it is directed by the speaker himself. The speaker of the Bhagavad Gita is Lord Sri Krishna. He is mentioned on every page of Bhagavad Gita as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Bhagavan. So, this is what Srila Prabhupada says about how we should understand the Gita. But our so-called Mahatma, he was, of course, he even reduced the Supreme Lord to the level of Adam, and then he was attributing everything to the author of the Gita. So, Srila Prabhupada also explains in the intro chapter that Lord Sri Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as is confirmed by all great acharyas, spiritual masters like Shankaracharya, Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya, Nimbarka Swami, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and many other authorities of Vedic knowledge in India. The Lord himself also establishes himself as the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the Bhagavad Gita, and he is accepted as such in the Brahma Samhita and all the Puranas, especially the Srimad Bhagavatam, known as the Bhagavata Purana, Krishna to Bhagavatam 1.3.28. Therefore, we should take Bhagavad Gita as it is, directed by the personality of Godhead himself. However, our so-called Mahatma, he has other opinion about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because apparently he clearly did not think that Mahabharata was historical. So whatever he has written from his so-called commentary, we can clearly see how his so-called commentary is clearly in contradiction with what our entire Guru Parampara says. Also, our so-called Mahatma says that the Gita is not a collection of do's and don'ts. In chapter 16, about the divine and demonic natures, 16.1 to 3, it talks about the divine qualities. In the purport, Prabhupada explains all these 26 qualifications are transcendental qualities. They should be cultivated. If these qualities are developed by practice by all classes of men, then gradually it is possible to rise to the highest platform of transcendental realization. So clearly in the Gita, there are do's and don'ts mentioned, like in chapter 16 especially. But of course, our so-called Mahatma was hell-bent upon presenting only his own mental concoction. 16.4 Dambadharpamyanasya Krodha Parushyamevacha Ajnanam Chavidasya Partha Sampadam Asurim. Pride, arrogance, conceit, anger, harshness, and ignorance. These qualities belong to those of demoniac nature, O son of Pruta. 16.4 Purport. In this verse, the royal road to hell is described. So we can clearly see that how the do's and don'ts are explained in the Gita. Also in 16.21, Krishna says, Trividam Nargashedam, Dwaram Nashnamatmana, Kamakrodas Tatalobas, Tasmadeda Trayam Tajed. Every sane man should give these up: lust, anger, and greed. Still, our so-called Mahatma says that Gita is not a book of do's and don'ts. Next, our so-called Mahatma says that the Gita is not for those who have no faith. The author makes Krishna say. Again, our so-called Mahatma has actually reduced the level of the Supreme Lord Krishna, and he's again and again attributing everything to the author. Now, throughout this session, I've actually tried to establish the clear contradictions between the manufactured Mahatma's commentary and what our bona fide acharyas have said. So some of the sycophants of the so-called Mahatma, they might be too upset, and they might even say, how dare you talk about Mahatma? So we have clearly seen that that person whom we were supposed to trust as a Mahatma, he was clearly not a Mahatma, not even by the definition from the Gita. Ironically, the sycophants of the so-called Mahatma, they always say that you should not question about the Mahatma, but they are also the ones who have always been questioning about Lord Ram, especially in 2007. There's one family in India. They have actually hijacked this Gandhi surname purely for their political purpose. In 2007, that government, they even submitted an affidavit to the Supreme Court saying that Lord Ram was a mythical figure. But after the kind of trashing they got in 2014, they were forced to say this about the Ram Mandir in 2018. And since then, after the kind of trashing they got in 2014 and 2019 especially, there's always been this competition within the family of the Italian mafia and also their slaves to prove themselves as Ram Bhakts. So there's always this competition of late within the Italian mafia family and also the slaves of that family. They always try to chant the names of Ram as much as they can. But no matter how much they try, Krishna is always there as the Paramatma in the hearts of all living entities. This also we have seen from many verses in the Gita and also from the purports of Bhagavatam. So the Paramatma always knows about what is really there in the hearts of all living entities. And therefore, even for the cheaters, Krishna is even greater than all the other cheaters. So those who only invoke the name of Lord Ram for their political purposes, so their true intentions will always be revealed, even without them knowing it. So after the kind of trashing the Italian mafia family got in 2014, they were always trying to project themselves as great devotees of Lord Ram. But every now and then, Krishna makes them expose their true nature. So ironically, as long as you question regarding the existence of Lord Ram, you are regarded as an intellectual. But the moment you start questioning whether this manufactured Mahatma, was he really a Mahatma, then the crybaby sycophants of the so-called Mahatma will say that, how dare you question regarding the Mahatma? So at that time, all their so-called rationalism and intellectual capacity will be completely eroded. So that is the irony. However, Krishna also says in Gita 5.29, Bhoktaram Yaktan Tapasam Sarvaloka Maheshwaram. Krishna is the supreme controller, and therefore, no matter how much the slaves of the Italian mafia family, no matter how much they try to mock Lord Ram, the Ayodhya verdict, which came in on 9 November 2019, that was clearly the arrangement of the Supreme Lord. So the date of the Pran Pratishtha Puja has also been fixed. It will happen in 22nd January next year. So no matter how hard these people try, ultimately it is the supreme will of the Supreme Lord Krishna that prevails. So the purpose of this session is mainly to highlight the contradictions of the so-called manufactured Mahatma, mainly because I've also seen many ISKCON preachers, especially out of their enthusiasm to distribute the Bhagavad Gita, they also often end up, knowingly or unknowingly, they end up invoking the name of this manufactured Mahatma whenever they talk about the Gita. However, our acharyas, they have clearly debunked, especially Srila Prabhupada has clearly debunked the so-called commentary of this manufactured Mahatma also. So if we even unknowingly try to project the manufactured Mahatma as some kind of a brand ambassador of the Bhagavad Gita, so that would be the greatest disservice to the Acharya who gave us Bhagavad Gita as it is. So we have clearly seen how the manufactured Mahatma understood what kind of understanding he had regarding the Supreme Lord Krishna. So that's what Srila Prabhupada has also explained in the preface section to Bhagavad Gita as it is. This absolute position of Krishna is difficult to understand for any person who is not a devotee of Krishna in the system of parampara, disciplic succession. Generally, the so-called scholars, politicians, philosophers, and swamis, without perfect knowledge of Krishna, try to banish or kill Krishna when writing commentary on Bhagavad Gita. So the so-called commentary of the manufactured Mahatma, it clearly fits this description. Such unauthorized commentary, known as Mayavada Bhashya, Lord Chaitanya clearly says that anyone who tries to understand Bhagavad Gita from the Mayavadi point of view will commit a great blunder. But in my humble opinion, after seeing this so-called commentary of the manufactured Mahatma, I feel that even the authorized Mayavada Bhashya even appears to be slightly better than the garbage written by the manufactured Mahatma. The result of such a blunder will be that the misguided student of Bhagavad Gita will certainly be bewildered on the path of spiritual guidance and will not be able to go back home, back to Godhead. So if we even unknowingly try to distribute the Bhagavad Gita by invoking the name of the manufactured Mahatma, so that would be the greatest disservice to Srila Prabhupada, who gave us Bhagavad Gita as this. So that's all I wanted to share, mainly regarding the contradictions by the so-called Mahatma compared to the bona fide teachings of our Acharyas. So that's all for today's session. Any questions or comments?
Everything is okay, Bhagavad.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare